You know, it was interesting. This executive program that I launched up at MIT, was it 16 years ago now, called The Birthing of Giants. Our very first speaker we ever had was the famous Pat McGovern. Pat was voted CEO of the decade of the 80s. He built a company called International Data Group. At the time, they're about $600 million. They're $3 billion today. They do most of the PC magazines. They had the Dummies books, a lot of the kind of brands that you'd be familiar with. And Pat's company was really just made up of a whole bunch of small little gazelles that would pop into some obscure country and launch a PC magazine. And he had just 3 rules for every one of those leaders of those new publications. And by the way, every quarter they had to come into his office and sit down with Pat, and behind him would be the score on these 3 numbers. He said, my 3 rules are: 1, you need to grow at twice the rate of your local market. So if the local market's growing at 20%, I want to see revenue growth at 40% because we need to be gaining market share. Number 2, I want you to take 10% net to the bottom line. I don't care what else is going on, your excuses about growth sucking cash and all those things. So grow twice the rate of the market, take 10% to the bottom line. And number 3, he said, and I want you to spend 3% of revenue on education. Use it or lose it. He says, I don't want any of you. He says, I know that the thing that will stop us long-term as a company is when we stop learning. And one of the ways guys can kind of make their profit number is cut back on educational expenditure. And Pat had a philosophy about what it took to grow the business, and he didn't want anybody taking out of that budget in order to make their numbers. And so I always thought that was kind of a good rule of thumb. American Society of Training and Development has some real detailed data and information around this. And by the way, when they did this, it almost seemed self-serving, but it got validated by a lot of outside sources. When they correlated between what factors drove the success of companies, they looked at capital investment and R&D and all kinds. The only expenditure that correlated was learning and education. It's why the first decision Jack Welch made when he took over GE, even though he had to let go of a lot of folks, is he put a tremendous amount of money into Crotonville. And today, I think it's paid dividends, that they made that investment. No different than Goldman Sachs. In fact, the guy that went over to Goldman Sachs was Steve Kerr, who ran Crotonville for Jack Welch for many years. And when Jack left, Steve went to Goldman and set up their leading executive education system as well. So I think those are the benchmarks. Bad news is, I don't have specific numbers on the growth companies. I think it's a great idea and we should go get it moving forward.